So today, we're diving into one of the most intense and honestly complex chapters of the Quran, Surah At-Tawbah, or the Repentance. This was revealed right near the end of the Prophet's life, and it reads like a hot document. A raw, unfiltered look at a community that's grappling with victory, with war, and with treachery. And it all starts with a puzzle. Right off the bat, we hit a mystery. Out of all 114 chapters in the Quran, this is the only one that leaves out the opening invocation of mercy, the Bismillah. And this isn't some small detail. It's a huge deal that scholars have puzzled over for centuries. Why would a chapter literally named the Repentance start without a mention of God's mercy? Well, there are basically two big theories about this. The most common one is that this chapter is essentially a wartime declaration. The Bismillah, that opening line, it signifies peace, mercy, and security. So leaving it out is a deliberate signal that what follows is a severe warning. The other theory points to a kind of editorial question. There's a narration that suggests the Prophet passed away before he could clarify if this chapter was a standalone thing or a continuation of the one before it. So the early scribes, just to be safe, they left a space between the chapters but didn't add a new Bismillah. For this explainer, we're really going to focus on that first theory. Because to truly get the tone of this chapter, you have to understand the incredibly high-stakes moment it came from. The context is absolutely everything. So, let's set the scene. Picture this. The year is 9 AH, or 630 CE. It's a massive turning point. The Muslims have just peacefully taken control of Mecca, which makes Islam the dominant power in Arabia. But the situation is totally unstable. Different tribes are breaking their treaties left and right. So during the annual Hajj pilgrimage, a formal declaration of dissociation is announced. And at the exact same time, a huge threat is gathering to the north, the Byzantine Roman Empire. The opening of this chapter is that declaration. It acts as a political ultimatum. It gives all the polytheist tribes who had broken their deals a grace period, exactly 4 months. And they had a choice. Either accept the new political reality, leave the area, or prepare for war. So what happens when those 4 months are up? Well, that brings us to verse 5, a verse often called the verse of the sword. It lays out a stark command for dealing with those who chose to continue fighting. But here's the thing that's so crucial. The very next verse completely reframes it. See, the key here is that even in a state of all-out war, if an enemy soldier asks for protection, for safe passage, just so they can hear the message of Islam, they have to be protected and escorted back to safety. This shows you something really important. The ultimate goal wasn't just conquest. The fight wasn't with every single person, but with a political system that kept breaking its promises. Okay, so with that ultimatum laid down in Arabia, the chapter pivots. It turns its attention to that other huge event from that year, the Expedition of Tabuk. This was a campaign that would become the ultimate test of faith for the entire community. And let me tell you, this campaign was no joke. They literally called it the Army of Hardship, and for good reason. The journey north was long, the summer heat was just brutal, and the call to march came right at harvest time, which meant a huge financial sacrifice for everyone. And the enemy? Oh, just the superpower of the day, the Roman Empire. This wasn't some quick raid for loot. It was a grueling, strategic expedition that served as a kind of divine litmus test for who was truly committed. But all this pressure, this incredible hardship, it did something else. It exposed a crack running right through the middle of the Muslim community in Medina itself. A huge chunk of this chapter isn't even about the external enemy. It's dedicated to the enemy within. The Quran has a specific name for them, the munafiqun, which translates to the hypocrites. These were people who acted like Muslims on the outside, but were secretly working against the community from the inside. And this brutal Tabuk campaign, it was the perfect pressure cooker to reveal who they really were, because they tried everything they could to get out of going. And you won't believe the excuses they came up with. The chapter just lays them all out. They'd say things like, oh, the journey is too hard, or it's too far. Get this. One guy, Jad ibn Qais, came up with a real doozy. He claimed he was afraid he'd be tempted by the beautiful Roman women. The Quran calls out every single one of these excuses as nothing but flimsy lies. But their scheming went even further. This next part is just audacious. They decided to build their own mosque just outside of Medina. They claimed it was for the sick and the poor, but the Quran exposed its real purpose. It calls it a mosque of harm. Think about that. They were using the most sacred symbol of community as a secret base for treason, a place to organize and plot against the Muslims. But here's the thing. For all the warnings and harsh words, the chapter is called The Repentance, and there's a very good reason for that. It draws this brilliant contrast between the scheming hypocrites and sincere believers who just messed up. And that brings us to one of the most powerful stories in the entire chapter. Okay, so get this story. It's about three genuine believers, including a famous companion named Ka'b ibn Malik. Now, they didn't cook up some flimsy excuse like the hypocrites. They stayed behind from the Tabuk campaign basically because of procrastination. And when the Prophet returned, they owned up to it and told the truth. And their punishment? It was intense, a 50-day social boycott. I mean, nobody in the entire city was allowed to even speak to them. And the way the Quran describes how they felt is just breathtakingly poetic. It says the whole earth, as wide as it was, felt like it was closing in on them. They hit rock bottom. They felt so completely alone that they finally realized the only way to escape from God was to run back to God. And in that very moment of pure, sincere repentance, a verse came down from heaven announcing their forgiveness, and the whole city erupted in joy. And this brings us all the way back around. Remember how we started wondering about the missing mercy? Well, after all the warnings, all the talk of war and hypocrisy, the chapter ends by describing the Prophet's own character. The very person delivering this incredibly harsh message is described as someone who grieves when his people suffer, someone who is deeply concerned for them, and is kind and merciful. It's an incredible reminder that even the most severe divine justice can be delivered through a vessel of profound compassion. So what do we take away from all this? It really leaves you with a big question, right? When we read a text that seems harsh or severe, how much does our understanding change when we realize it wasn't some timeless abstract sermon, but a real-time dispatch from the front lines of a crisis involving war, politics, and internal rebellion? It's a powerful reminder that context is everything.